Welcome to Wonders of the Word. Somehow you have stumbled across my channel, and I don't know how, but I'm glad that you did. Did you know that the crown of thorns was prophesied in the Old Testament? Not in a prediction fulfillment type verse, but in a pattern that we can discover in one of the stories, one of the very familiar stories of the Old Testament. It occurs in Genesis chapter 22. You'll recognize this as the chapter that tells us the story of Abraham, in his old age, offering his precious son Isaac as a sacrifice to God. He did this out of obedience, and because of his obedience, all nations of the earth are blessed through him. But in this story, we read about Abraham as a type of God the Father, and Isaac as a type of God the Son. Abraham and Isaac walked together to the place of sacrifice. Isaac carried the wood of the sacrifice, just like Jesus carried the cross. Abraham carried the fire and the knife, just like it was God the Father's will to crush the Son. There are many details throughout this chapter that paint the story of Jesus being offered on the cross through the lives of Abraham and Isaac. But there's a point in the story where the focus on Isaac as a type of Christ shifts to the ram with his horns caught in a thicket. This occurs in chapter 22, verse 13. Just as Abraham is raising the knife to slay his son, and God calls out to him, "Abraham, Abraham," and he stops the sacrifice. Verse 13 says this, "Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son." A ram is a male lamb, and we know that Paul calls Jesus the Passover lamb. The Passover lamb had to be a male lamb. So when we see this ram with his horns caught in the thicket, we're getting a picture of the Lamb of God. In particular, his horns, which is a sign of his strength and authority, are caught in a thicket. I imagine the thicket being full of briars and thorns. So you have a male lamb or a ram with his horns caught in the thicket. This ram was sacrificed in place of Isaac. It's a substitutionary sacrifice for a sinner. This again is a clear picture of the cross. If we read in John chapter 19, verse 5, it says, "When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, 'Here is the man.'" So the ram with his horns caught in the thicket full of briars and thorns is a picture of Jesus wearing the crown of thorns on the cross. Jesus was crucified in the place of the sinners, just like the ram was sacrificed in place of Isaac. It's no accident that this story occurs in chapter 22 of Genesis. The 22nd Hebrew letter is Tav. The ancient Paleo form of Tav was the sign of a cross long before it had its modern Hebrew script. So it's very interesting that in Genesis 22, we have this amazing picture of the cross painted through the story of Isaac and Abraham, and specifically with the ram and his horns caught in the thicket, foreshadowing the crown of thorns. In addition, Psalm 22 gives us the very words of Jesus on the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is the very first line of Psalm 22. It talks about his hands and feet being pierced. This was written by David many, many years before Jesus was ever crucified. But the fact that it occurs in chapter 22 shows us that it's there intentionally, and it teaches us about the cross. As you can see, the crown of thorns is clearly foreshadowed in the ram with his horns caught in the thicket. And this is just another amazing wonder of the Word. Thanks for listening.